Hi, it's Kelly at Book and Paper Arts. Today's video is part 2 in how to use your tea bags as an art supply. Part 1 was how to use tea bags with mixed media techniques. Today, it's going to be all about painting on your tea bags using a variety of different liquid media. If you like journal arts, altered books, vintage books, paper, and other ephemera, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and be sure and turn on the notifications, and you will have more of them in your life. Now let's go paint some tea bags. To prepare your tea bag, first you need to decide how you want to use it as a substrate. I like to open mine flat and then paint on it as if it is a piece of very thin linen parchment kind of paper. But if you look online at tea bag painting, you will find that a lot of people like to keep it in the tea bag shape, and that shape informs their painting. If that's what you want to do, then you want to be careful not to cut it all out of shape. So the easiest way to do that is to just make a very, very thin incision and dump out your leaves, and hey presto. If you want to be even more fiddly, you could turn it over and make your cut in the back. And then when you have emptied everything, you won't have any cutting at all. Because this paper is so very porous, it's a good idea to prime your tea bags before you get started working on them. I'm going to use clear gesso. If you don't have store-bought clear gesso, you can make your own. I have a video showing a recipe for making homemade clear gesso with, it's very inexpensive and it uses super common kitchen supplies. You can just whip it right up. If you don't have either of those options, go ahead and try it without priming it and see what happens. It might work just fine. Use what you got. But if you do decide to add a primer to it, especially if you've opened it out flat, it's going to go to the back. It's going to paint all the way to the back from the front. It's just going to go through the paper. And in that case, you're going to have a little layer of the gesso on whatever surface you're gluing on. This is important. Make sure that you don't leave it there to dry, because if you do, where the gesso has pooled will make splotchy, sticky, messy patterns on the back, and it's not nice. Instead, put your gesso on, pick it up, and move it to a dry spot. And then, from time to time while it's drying, just pick it up and make sure that it's not gluing itself to your wax paper. And you'll have a much prettier, cleaner result. While that's drying, let's look at how different paints and liquid media work on this as paper. It's really important that you use what is available to you and what works with your style. So these are just some notes. Don't take any of this as written in stone. Experiment and find out what works for you. I have seen some beautiful watercolor tea bag paintings. I personally find it's a little too subtle a media to get really, really dramatic results with. But that is probably just my style. I did do this painting with watercolor. I think because it's a thinner paper, that helps. But I don't like it as much as I do like gouache. Gouache is also water-based, but it has a heavier thickener, binder, and that makes it more viscous and more robust. So you can see here that you're getting a lot of pop of color. And so this is the one that I like to use. Here is a mandala that I made using gouache. Another heavy-bodied paint is acrylic. And it does a very pretty job. But because this paper, even if you press it, is going to be bumpy and a little wrinkly, I find that it might be too heavy unless you add just a little bit of water to thin it down. And if you do that, you're going to have more control of the acrylic paint. I forgot to say that watercolor is a pretty way to put down a wash background. So I just added a little bit of light blue there, and now I can add a focal point, which I will do in a few minutes. But it does make a pretty wash. Ink. If you have primed this, then you can use ink pretty successfully. So if you want to do some lettering or some asemic writing, you can use ink. You can also paint with ink. And like the watercolor, this one's a little bit subtle, but you could get a lot of detail using ink if that's a medium that you work in. Another choice might be a charcoal pencil. If you like to work with pencil drawings. Another version of that would be the soft chalk pastel. That's going to give a lot of color. It's not very easy to get a subtle drawing with that, but if you work in pastel, you know what you're doing. Finally, here is a fun alternative that bridges the gap between paint and ink. And that is if you have, as a lot of you do, a Derwent Inktense stick. I have put a little bit of water in my palette already. You don't want much. And now I'm going to take a wet brush and start pulling the color, just splishing it down there using the brush. And now you can see that it makes a very inky thing that you can work with that's going to give a lot of color and a lot more control than, say, an acrylic might. So if you do have those, that's another way that you can use them. I'm going to make a couple of paintings, but first I want to recommend to you someone named Ruby Silvious. She's an artist who works on tea bags, and she makes these things into little masterpieces. I have linked to her Pinterest page in the text below this video, and if you go there, you are going to find so much inspiration. In the meantime, you got me, and I hope that this will get you jump-started. I forgot to mention that before you start painting, you should iron your tea bag. After you've gessoed it, after it's dried, then iron it nice and flat with a dry iron. So this is with the gouache. And once the base layer of gouache has dried, you can add more layers. They're going to go on super opaque, which means you can add a lot of fun stuff. And detail. Now I'm going to go back in with some more gouache that I've mixed a lighter pink here. Just add some detail. I'm also going to go back to this because it's dried and play around some more. This is why I really like the gouache, because while the watercolor can be pretty, you can't really build up the layers like you can with the gouache. Or maybe you can. Give it a try. Let me know if you have luck. Now that I've got a stash of painted tea bags, what am I going to do with them? I am pretty sure that Ruby Silvious actually mounts hers on watercolor paper or card, and they're sold that way to be framed and put on the wall like a picture. I am more likely myself to turn it into an art journal page. Or maybe use it to start an altered book like this. Because the tea bag is so thin, when you glue it down, when you've added your adhesive, anything underneath, it's going to go on semi-translucent, and you're going to see anything underneath here, like the text. So it would be a fun way to start an altered book or art journal page. Here is some cheap paper that I got at the Works. It's a local discount craft store. And so this is just scrapbook paper. Nothing special. But again, once I put my tea bag on there, and make it nice and flat, the details that are underneath peek through. And again, I could take this now and put it in another art journal. A lot of texture and layer there. Since I've got this out, let me show you a little different technique for adding some color to this. I'm going to combine techniques. I did this in watercolor using very, very strong pigment. And now it's dried, and I'm going to go back in with charcoal pencils. And it sits right up on top and really, really pops. Here's a lighter one. It's not popping as much, but it is adding some highlight and shadow. Here's a close-up look at some of the tea bags that I've made. This one is abstract, and I did it with acrylic. It's really fun to make abstract little squares and circles. This is the watercolor that I've highlighted with charcoal pencils and put on the scrapbook paper. These are all done with watercolor. And again, you can see that the color is a lot softer. But maybe that's your style, and you could work with that and do something that looks like you. This is a teacup, really it is, and it's also with watercolor. This teacup is the one that I made with gouache. And there's a mandala, also very fun to make. You could just layer these up forever. And Mr. Bird. There is another way that you could use your tea bags now that you've painted them, and that is turn them into little books. I am working on a video telling you how to make little books and altered books out of your tea bags. That will be coming to you in the near future. In the meantime, please check out the text below this video. It has links to other tea bag painting information, and you can read about what's going on here at Book and Paper Arts. Please let me know if you have any questions or any comments. Let me know how you are finding getting on with painting tea bags on your own. Let's compare notes. Until next time, happy making.